Hi, welcome to Systems Engineering week number 3. This week we will discuss 2 of the course objectives. We'll focus on those ones primarily on creating your own personal leadership model based on the concepts within the course. And then second, focusing on personal and team motivation models. This will be the major focus of today's lesson. There will be 5 objectives that we will discuss. First, to talk about aptitudes, talents, and skills. Second, the concept of flow. Third, we'll introduce you to the ladder of inference if you haven't seen this already in the 5th discipline book. Fourth will be the Johari window. And finally, we'll close the session with next steps. To tie this to our systems model based on the leadership commandments, this week we're going to cover additional understanding or knowing thyself, and with the focus area in the second commandment about understanding others. Using the Adam model, first we'll talk about analyzing to continue to give you tools for evaluating your current environment, and second we'll do some design this week to help you develop a strategy to improve your leadership within the workplace. First, let's talk about 3 elements: aptitudes, talents, and skills. Many of these terms are used synonymously, and I believe it's important to segregate these, especially as we're going to be talking about the elements of motivation this week. First, you have aptitudes. These are different things that we are good at, and they're primarily innate to us, that we've been born with these. And if you had a collection of aptitudes, that would define your talents. So for example, if you were good at maybe catching a ball or surveying different people's behaviors, possibly playing baseball might be a talent that you would have by pulling all of your aptitudes together. Second is the elements of skills. So when skills are not innate, they are developed over time. Now the key here is when you have aptitudes and skills together, you can develop extraordinary results. And the authors Brody and Stanley said it, I think, best, where talent development is important to achieving one's full potential. Within this leadership course, we are talking about understanding yourself, like we did last week with your behavioral styles, developing your talents, which are based on your aptitudes, and then as you are getting your degree and experience, you are honing your skills. The goal to be able to get you extraordinary results and create a career for yourself. The next concept we're going to ask you to do is to capture what you would do on a weekly basis. And it's based around 2 variables: challenge and skill. As an example, what I've done here is I've taken a network engineer and I've plotted his normal type of week. Now I will provide you directions here, and then we're going to ask you to pause this lecture and create your own chart prior to moving forward in order that you don't bias your input. So let's talk about how you create this. First, we'll start with your skill level, and you'll notice we have anywhere from novice to expert skill. We've numbered those from 0 to 1 to 10. 0 would mean I have no skill level of this whatsoever. I may not have even experienced it. And an expert level of 10 means that I've done this so much that I could pretty much do this in my sleep. For example, let's start with the element in the lower right hand corner. What we first like you to do is think about the things that you do. Maybe you do a weekly status report. So we'd ask you to say, okay, so based on doing the weekly status report, what is my skill level of doing that? Well, if it's exceptionally high, I might put the dot here, and then I would say, based on my challenge level, which would be 0 for no challenge or 10 for an extreme challenge, where would I place that particular dot? And it could be anywhere from here all the way up to here. However, if you're like I am, I've probably done thousands or at least hundreds of status reports in my lifetime. So I am pretty much an expert at that, and the challenge level, if I was to look over here, is probably somewhere in the 0 to 1 range. Thus I have a dot here in the far right hand corner. Then what I do is I will say, I'll put a brief note here, status report of what it is, and then estimate how long that takes for the entire week. Then we ask you to do the same thing for all of your other challenges or all of the other things that you work on at the workplace. So don't bring in elements outside of work. Now if you do work at home, you're more than welcome to bring that information in. But we'd ask you to keep this strictly related to the different work that you do. And the other tip that we would give you is, say if you're working on different types, say emails or different types of projects, or you have a project that has different variables within there, is we'd ask you to split that out. So for example, if I had project Y and I worked 5 hours, and part of that was I needed advanced skills and it was relatively intense, I'd put that there. However, if I had another piece of project Y that was very, very routine, maybe I would put a piece of it to say over here, project Y. So the more that you make this accurate, the better that it will be. Hopefully that's understandable. Bottom line is, figure out your challenge, figure out your skill, place the dot there, put a note of what it is, and then figure out on an average week how much time it is. Collectively, you should have close to a 40 or 50 hour week. Now that you have the direction, we'll ask you to pause or stop the lecture here and plot your weekly activities. You can come back to this lecture immediately after you have it done, or you can take some time during the week to do this. Welcome back. Now that you have your week plotted, we're going to help you interpret what this means. Now, if you've watched the video on TED by the gentleman by the name of Dr. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, he talks about the concept of flow. This is where this particular motivational tool was extracted and developed from. What we'd ask you to do now is take a ruler or a pencil and draw this channel throughout the center of your diagram. Probably I would say it's maybe 1.5 inches or 2 inches in width. And what you have in here, in this center section, is you have this concept of flow, where you have the right balance of skill and balance of challenge. So like a 5 and a 5, for example. that creates this element of flow, or commonly known as being in the zone. Now, the next question that comes up is, well, if I'm not in flow, what am I in? Well, if I look at the upper left-hand corner, if I have too much challenge, let's say up here for system B crash, and too little skill, where I'm going to say a novice, that would put me in a state of anxiety. And the more challenge and the less skill I have, the higher the anxiety. Now, if I'm not in anxiety, in this area, I would be in boredom. This is where, as you can imagine, with the status reports, I'm an expert at it. However, there's no challenge. That is in boredom. Now, the idea is that you want to try to get as close to the flow zone as possible, not only for yourself, but also for the people that you manage or that you interface with. Okay, so let's talk about 4 different conditions. The first is, say if I start here at A0 and my boss or myself raises my challenge. Okay, that will move me into anxiety. Now, one of 2 things can happen here. I can either lower my challenge, work with him to get me more resources, more help, different things, or I can continue to raise my skill. By raising my skill, I move from A1 to A2, which gets me back into the flow zone. The second thing that could have happened if I was starting off at A0 would be is I could move to A1. That's where my boss or myself, I leave the challenge the same, and ultimately, as my skills get better and better and better, I become ultimately bored. Now, there's one of 2 things that you can do here. The first is I can move up to A2 by getting the challenge raised. However, I can't move backwards and reduce my skill. So the only option is to either raise the challenge or to go off and do different type of work. One of the things that I've seen from lots of consulting with organizations is that most managers end up kind of in this area. And what they've done in the lower right hand corner is they have neglected to delegate. So they get better and better and better at something. However, they don't allow the people on their staffs to do that since they're so good, so they're so quick at it. This creates a very poor environment for learning and development. It also keeps the manager from being able to achieve higher level of strategic work. So if you as a manager find yourself way over here in this area, in the 7 to 10 range in the lower right hand quadrant, where you have high skill and minimum challenge, that's usually a great opportunity for delegation. All right, now Dr. Chiksing Mihai says that flows exhibited in one of these 8 conditions. Quite often all or at least one of these conditions exist. And why we're bringing this into the leadership discussion is that it is your job for yourself and for the people that you lead to try to create these environments so that people can get as close to flow as possible. The closer to flow that you are, the more engaged that you will be, the more satisfied that you will be, and also they found out that creativity happens more significantly when you are in flow. So let's talk about the 8 elements. The first is, in flow, we confront tasks that we believe we have a chance of completing. So you have to give me a chance and have some hope that this is possible. The second is, we're able to concentrate on what we're doing. That external environmental elements are reduced. The third is, we have very clear goals. And I always work with the goals on 3 areas. I have quantity, I have quality, and I have pace. And if you have quantity, quality, and pace in your goals, or if you're used to working with SMART goals, generally you'll find that your goals are defined as clear and you have a better chance of achieving them. The fourth item is the activity that you're working on provides immediate feedback. I know how well I am doing. The fifth one is that we act with deep but effortless involvement. When you are in flow, even though you may be working very, very hard, it feels completely effortless. The sixth one is we believe that we have a sense of control over our actions. Let's tie this back to Daniel Pink's work from week 2, which was Drive, where it gives you autonomy. The concern for ourselves completely disappears, that we actually become part of the work. And last but not least, and probably the most important, is the duration of time is severely altered. Many of us, in fact almost everyone I've met, has been in some state of flow. And this typically happens when the sense of time is altered in a positive way. When you look up at the clock and you have this strong belief that it is 8 o'clock and it's actually midnight. You've just experienced flow where the sense of time is very altered. Let's talk about the next concept, the second to last concept for the lecture, which is the ladder of inference. And if you've read any of Peter Senge's work in the Fifth Discipline or the Fifth Discipline Field Book, where this is extracted from, you will have seen this. And the reason that the ladder of inference is brought in is to give you a deeper understanding, once again, going back to the Harvard leadership elements of understanding thyself, and the second commandment of understanding others. Once you understand what happens in our brains with the ladder of inference, you will have the ability to change the steps on the ladder, or at least be aware of them, so that you can make good decisions. Now, the first step on the ladder of inference is where we take in observable data and experience. This is kind of a videotape that records and captures our information. This is where we go out and seek information from all of our senses. And this is data that generally other people can see as well. From there, we move to selecting data from what we observe. So we have lots of sensory input. However, we make conscious decisions of which data that we want to observe to be able to use. And this is where we start entering some of our bias. The third step is now we add meaning, so that we take in our cultural and personal backgrounds and add different meaning to what we're seeing out there when we're observing a process or people. Once we've added the meaning, then we make some assumptions based on the meaning that you've added. The next step is you draw some conclusions about the assumptions you've made based on the meanings and the data and experiences that you've collected. And at that point, you adopt beliefs about the world. Okay, now, before I take you to the final step, I want to tell you what happens here. This is called the reflexive loop. Okay, and what happens is once we begin to adopt beliefs of the world, we go back here and look for observable data that supports our belief. And this is what develops bias. And quite often this is where managers and leaders begin to make bad decisions. So for example, say I notice that new hires that I have all have some type of red hair. So I select the data every time I see someone with red hair. I add meaning. So when I've met a new person with red hair based on the people that I've hired, which I think are exceptional, I make some assumptions that, hey, people with red hair are smarter. So I've drawn that conclusion. And now my belief is I need to only hire people with red hair. Okay. Now, every time I go and meet a person with red hair, I look for all of the good things that they do to continue to build on my theory that I've developed. However, hopefully you can see that there's a fallacy here, that since I've selected a very small group, possibly the information I'm getting is not accurate. And ultimately what happens in the last steps is I take some action. And in this scenario, in the future, I may not hire the best person with the talents, the aptitudes, or the skills based on some erroneous element such as red hair that I have believed causes the type of behavior and performance I want. Okay, and that's called the ladder of inference. Now that you're aware of that and you can see this reflexive loop, the key is to break any one of these patterns as you're going up the ladder to ensure that before you take actions, that the beliefs that you're developing have some validity. And the more open you are, the better, which will lead us to the next tool. This is the next and last tool for the lecture. It's called the Johari window. Okay, now this is a very powerful and simple tool, and it has 4 specific areas. The first area, which is the open or free area, and this is where it's called known by yourself or known by others. In the free area, everyone else knows what you're doing, you know what you're doing, you are an open book. Now, the goal ultimately, as you'll see at the end of this slide, is to make that area as large as possible. Now, as we move from the free area, let's move into area 2 here. We have something called the blind area. And in the blind area, this is unknown by you, but it is certainly known by others. Now, the only way that you can move this blind area to make it smaller is to solicit feedback. You have to get their input in order to give you the knowledge that they can see but you cannot. The third area down here in the lower left is known as the hidden area. Now, this is unknown by others, but it is known by yourself. And these are the secrets that you keep from your family, your friends, your coworkers. Some of those are very valuable and very valid, and others may actually keep the workers and the people that you're leading or working with, giving them the inability to work with you more effectively. So the way to fix this is to do self-disclosure and exposure. This will reduce even further the hidden area. And then the final area, which is area number 4 here, is this is the complete unknown area both to yourself and to others. And this is done by a combination of the blind area and the hidden area, where you do self-discovery, you get others' observations, and that's what's known as shared discovery. And ultimately, if I can move this open area, the blue area, so that I can get just these small areas here, which would be the unknown, that gives me the biggest possibility for growth and learning. So let's close out the lecture. For this week, first, hopefully you've already done this, and if you haven't done so, please complete your flow mapping on the diagram by Dr. Chiksing Mihai. Complete the week's articles and the reading from the textbooks. I ask you to continue your participation through the discussion questions, and take this information as well as what else is happening in class and the readings to begin preparing some final notes for your behavioral styles paper as well as your own leadership model. Thanks for listening.